Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 9 of X's and O's for this semester. Isaac Dinesen and Joe Thompson. We're going uncut today because we got a lot to unpack here with some recent things going on in the world of football. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time discussing the recent FCS Playoff bracket that just came out yesterday. We have a lot to unpack here. Let's just jump right into that first off. Let's also just acknowledge first that, again, we've been saying this the past few shows we've done, ranking teams, that's hard to do. So we admire the work that the committee has done. However, I'm a little disappointed with some of the results that we will be sharing with you as we will discuss
I think we can agree on quite a few of them.
So let's at least bring up the playoff bracket to start out. The number 1 seed, of course, is obvious. NDSU's number 1, as is really the number 2 seed, James Madison. They're number 2, and then 3 through 5, we had said previously, Keith Brake said that you could just pull them out of a hat. Here they are. Weber State's at 3, Sacramento State's at 4, Montana State's at 5. Montana is at 6, despite just losing to Montana State last weekend in convincing fashion. South Dakota State is number 7, and Central Arkansas, a non-automatic qualifier, gets the 8 seed out of the Southland Conference. So that's a look at the bracket as it stands. We'll talk about some of these individual things as we go forward. But for the moment, though, I want to cue up a clip, though, that we put together just before the show. And it highlights, I've been on Southern Illinois' case. I've been trying to campaign for them to make the playoffs. And while you notice that they may not have been up there, this is what I've been saying. Hopefully, I would think more than 3 teams make the playoffs this year.
I'd like to think so.
Because UNI is better than last year, and Illinois State is better than last year. I almost like Southern Illinois to potentially be a underdog shot at making the playoffs with the teams they have left on their schedule.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
However, what Southern Illinois deserves to get in because they have a 25-point road win against UMass. They're an FBS team. Yes, they're a really, really bad independent
relatively small as well
FBS team, but they still won by 25 points against a team that has 85 scholarships. That deserves recognition. I think Southern Illinois should get in at the very bottom. They should be playing on Thanksgiving weekend, but I think they're in with their resume. So at the same time, they didn't get in, despite playing a really, really good game against NDSU last weekend. They lost 21-7, but really the result shouldn't matter there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is an absolute travesty to me that Southern Illinois got left out despite a 5-game conference winning streak and an FBS win on their resume. But the biggest reason they got out, a lot of people are saying this, they didn't win a game against someone in the playoff field, and I think that is wrong.
I totally agree with you there. I think that's just a bunch of crap. And then it doesn't really matter if you don't beat like a lot of playoff teams. If you're playing well, you're playing well. You should at least get a shot at making it into the playoff bracket.
So Southern Illinois, not only did they not get in, but they also didn't get in over some of the teams that were on our bracket that we didn't mention by name, but Kennesaw State, they were one of the last 4 teams that got in, as well as Furman. I want to highlight those 2 in particular because, one, Kennesaw State they actually have 2 wins against non-Division I schools. We mentioned this as well in another show. They're NAIA teams. Those are really terrible teams to have on your resume. And also, Kennesaw is in despite playing 1 playoff team, and that was Monmouth.
Yeah.
And they lost by a lot to Monmouth. Monmouth gets a home playoff game against Holy Cross. They would play, if they were to win, they would play against James Madison. But man, Kennesaw gets in. They have an awful strength of schedule. Southern Illinois wins, according to Keith Brake, I've mentioned him on our show last week. He does a tremendous job. A lot of the people in the Fargo-Moorhead area do a tremendous job at covering the national perspective of the FCS. Southern Illinois has, most of their wins so much better than Kennesaw State's wins in general. I mean, it's just not even close. I just can't believe that they were left out based on that alone. And Furman as well, I want to get back to them because I did mention them. Furman does not have a win against a team that has a record above 500. What do you think about that?
I think that's a load of crap. I don't think they should get into the playoff based on the strength of schedule that they've had. Honestly,
the SoCon, that's where they came out of, and the AQ from that conference. Trying to find it on my sheet here in front of me. I can't find it. But at the same time, I can't believe, we're doing this. We already have enough Southeastern bias as it is in major college football. I'm just so shocked at that. I think the one thing, we'll move off of this for a second. Southern Illinois absolutely did get robbed. Let's at least end it at that.
Yep.
But at the same time, let's talk about something else. So we mentioned South Dakota State 7th. Okay, that's a no. Okay, I was going to ask if you agreed. That's a no. Okay, so we're in agreement on that.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
They lost to Illinois State, and also Illinois State is a team that almost didn't make the playoffs.
Yep.
I think solely because of their final game of the season against Youngstown State. So, okay, South Dakota State, they also lost to South Dakota last weekend. That was the first time they lost to South Dakota as a Division I team. So that's another thing that boggles my mind about this bracket.
When I heard that South Dakota State lost to South Dakota, South Dakota, not a good football team this year. They've had some success in the past couple of years, but this year they're just not good.
They're all right, but I don't know if they're a seeded team this year. They have a great defense.
Yeah, but losing to a team like South Dakota should not.
It's not a good look, despite many injuries they have.
Losing Jabari Gibbs, but that should have been enough to. They should have still obviously should be in the playoff, but I think they should have been playing on Thanksgiving weekend instead of having that bye.
They'd be a really, really good team, I think, but I don't know if I'd give them a seed. I just don't know about that.
All biases aside, you look at some of the losses they've had, both due to injury and the losses that they've had at home against some weaker opponents. You gotta feel like that would play a huge factor, but I guess not.
Just craziness. So UND, we also had been mentioning them in prior shows. They just managed to get in above teams like Southern Illinois, but for UND, it's more deserved because just by virtue of beating and competing against really good teams that the committee values highly. Surprised that they were among the last 4 in. I thought that they would have been more of a foregone conclusion at this point, but at the same time, I do get it. And the fact, though, that UND could have a rematch with NDSU in the second round is intriguing.
That is intriguing.
It's at least intriguing. It's something to look out for that UND does play at Nichols, which I find interesting as well. The way that the selection committee wants to schedule these first-round games, they want to make sure that as many teams as possible can drive to their opponent if they're going on the road, but UND and Thibodaux, Louisiana are not very close to each other.
Not at all, actually.
Not even remotely close. And also at the same time, UND has to use tents for their locker room for their game this Saturday.
I'm sorry, what?
That was reported today by, I think, some media outlet up in Grand Forks. UND is not even going to get a traditional locker room for their game against Nichols.
Oh my God!
I'll let that sink in for you just a little bit. That's disgusting. I don't like that.
I don't like that at all either.
Terrible.
We're NDSU students, but that's not fair to UND
no, it's
at
not.
all.
I mean,
you got to give them proper conditions to set up and properly get ready for a game. And
yeah,
to give
so
them tents?
So you
got to be kidding me.
If they do lose, I guess that will be an excuse. But man, going that far to Louisiana. And you don't get a locker room to change in.
That's crazy.
That's
crazy.
That's ridiculous to me. So, and also the last thing about the general bracket, before we move on into maybe predictions, if you're all right with that.
I'm down.
So, this bracket also features 4 Big Sky teams like we thought might not happen. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned this already, just the fact that Montana's here at 6, despite losing in convincing fashion to Montana State in Bozeman last weekend. I think that sends a message that Montana already was seeded regardless of the outcome. They just looked terrible against Montana State.
Yep.
But, the 4 Big Sky teams, I don't know when the last time a conference had 4 teams as a top 8 seed. That just seems way too high to me.
That seems like a lot, honestly.
Like, we haven't seen that from the CAA or even the MVFC, I don't think, of late.
At least not recently, anyway.
So, I mean, congratulations, though, to Sacramento State and the tremendous season they've had with a first-year head coach as well, getting the 4th seed in the playoffs. Super admirable, great job, that coach. I forget his name. He should be in firm conversation for National Coach of the Year. So that's at least a general look at how we thought this bracket looks. It's, definitely up to debate, and it's definitely, perspectives are aplenty with this kind of thing. But let's dive in then to more like the individual, sides of the bracket. Do you think that NDSU's side of the bracket was fairly placed in terms of this is the team at the top, they should get at least a favorable path to as favorable of a path to the championship game because they earned that number 1 seed?
Oh, yeah, I think absolutely. I feel like even regardless if they got an unfavorable path to the playoffs, NDSU has been so dominant in the FCS for so long. You could unless you put James Madison somehow at the 8th seed, there's no way they're going to at least make the semifinals, in my opinion.
So, yeah, that's very fair. The fact that they're playing Central Arkansas, many people that are evaluating Central Arkansas, they're not very high on them. They may even think that Illinois State has a chance, or SEMO, has a chance at upsetting Central Arkansas come the quarterfinal round. I don't know. But I'm more interested, though, in the Sacramento State / Montana State side of the NDSU bracket, the bottom half of that bracket. Just with the fact that you got an upstart Central Connecticut team.
Absolutely.
This is, I think, their 2nd time making the playoffs. They won 11 games. That's nothing to sniff at. And,
Right.
Sacramento State, should they come to Fargo, or Montana State, you might have, did you forget that Montana State played at NDSU in the 2nd round last year?
Yes.
Okay, so that just
Yes, I did.
That just shows how much of an improvement they are this year as opposed to where they are last year. So I'm curious. One of those teams down at the bottom of NDSU's bracket is going to come probably more than likely to Fargo to play. I almost like Sacramento State just with the newness of them, still being this underdog, this upstart team that no one's really thought of before. I think they're going to ride that momentum, and I think they may even give NDSU a good game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know exactly their play style, like whether they're spread or anything like that, or what kind of things they like to do. But I just kind of think, with this underdog factor, I think they might ride that all the way to the semifinal.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to watch. Sacramento State, Montana State, they got really nice schedules. They played really well. So we'll have to see what happens. I think looking at the two, I really know nothing about these two teams, so I'm just going to go for a wild guess. I'd say North Dakota State, Sacramento State in the semifinal.
That's what I'd go with, at least 2, but I wouldn't discount Montana State.
We'll have to see what happens.
Don't think any of the teams that are playing on Thanksgiving on that side would make it to the semifinal round. The other side of the bracket, though, it's a lot more difficult, I think.
Yeah.
Based on the seeded teams, JMU's really good. South Dakota State, with their defense, can give anybody fits.
Absolutely.
Montana and Weber State already played each other in the regular season. If they were to meet again, that would be super interesting. I think Montana already beat Weber, if I'm not mistaken. So that rematch would then be at Weber State. Possibilities are abound there. Possibilities are endless there. So how do you see this side of the bracket going?
If things had worked out for South Dakota State, I think you would see them and James Madison playing in the semifinal again like they did a couple of years ago. Fortunately, with their losses and the way they were seeded, they're going to meet in the quarterfinals instead. So really, the semifinal game that I think everybody wanted to see is going to happen to meet in the quarterfinals. I think James Madison pulls that out. Even with the other teams like UNI San Diego, Monmouth, Holy Cross, I think those teams, not necessarily irrelevant, but they're just they're going to be going up against really the class of the FCS. If South Dakota State is in the class of the FCS when they're fully healthy, unfortunately they're not. They don't have Jabari Gibbs, but really quarterfinals are going to be South Dakota State and James Madison. As far as the other side of the bracket goes, I think you can see Weber State going to handle. Kennesaw State would be an interesting matchup for them, even Watford. But I think Weber State has enough talent to where they can sneak into the semifinals and go up against James Madison.
I told you this before the show. When I saw that Wofford and Kennesaw State were going to play each other in the first round, it reminded me a lot of the Spider-Man pointing at each other meme. Because that's who they are. They both play the exact same way. They're both old-fashioned triple option. So I'm actually the most curious about this game in particular just because of the clashing play styles. They're the same play. They play the same way. I think that's probably going to be the most entertaining maybe first round game.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving Saturday, but I guess, I mean, otherwise I would kind of at least agree with the James Madison SDSU. They're probably going to be that's going to be the quarterfinal matchup on that side. It's really tough though to gauge with the other stuff.
Montana and Weber State. That's really a tough one to judge.
Yeah, and Villanova as well. Maybe, they have a chance at unseating Montana. Villanova has had at least a reputation of having a good defense, and then you get the massive unpredictability with Wofford and Kennesaw State. Maybe Kennesaw State plays above their strength of schedule like we harped on earlier in this segment. That's why the FCS playoffs are so interesting to me. Anybody can play well at this stage of the year. So
Absolutely.
I'm curious, but, in terms of who ultimately goes to Frisco, I think before the playoffs start, again, excuse our biases, NDSU's going back. I don't think there's any doubt about that, at least for the moment. We have to be proven wrong otherwise. Somebody would have to really come in with a 2016 JMU spirited-like effort in order to maybe see that happen. I think NDSU's going to go back. The other side, don't know. There are so many things that could happen here. I think maybe just because they're new and because they were the second best team in the country last year, why not give Weber State a shot at going to Frisco?
That's an interesting. These are just predictions. We don't know what's actually going to happen until the game starts.
I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go NDSU Weber in Frisco this year.
I want to just take a look at this bracket. In my opinion, things are just really quite simple. I'm just going to roll that up to say that doesn't matter. I feel like we're going to get NDSU versus James Madison part 3.
Okay, that's what you're going with there.
That's what I'm going with there.
All right. Sure.
Anything can happen in the playoffs, but I think when it comes down to it, two best teams in the FCS, James Madison, NDSU, they're the only two teams that can legitimately compete against each other. They're going to go run through this, not necessarily run through it, but they're going to have, I think ultimately at the end, they're going to be the last two teams standing when it comes into Frisco.
That's probably fair. So let's then transition then to our talk on the NFL. We've been talking quite a bit about the NFL of late, and they continue to give us reasons to talk about them. Let's at least talk generally. I wanted to at least touch on the playoff picture in both conferences, but first let's at least discuss a little bit about yesterday's games. No Viking game to recap. But at the same time, we at least had some high-profile matchups that happened yesterday. Yeah. Seattle, Philadelphia, that was kind of a stinker.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Seattle, at least they did prove that they can win off a bye.
Yeah, absolutely.
Traveling across the country. The Dallas-New England game, we had at least hoped for better conditions, at least in that game. But at the same time, we didn't. The weather was really bad out there.
Yeah.
I don't really know, what's like something to, grab from that game. And then I think the other game that we wanted to touch on, that actually gave us a little bit more material, San Francisco, Green Bay.
Yeah, because it matters to the Vikings. It was a game that had implications on the NFC North Division lead right now. Before going into that game, Green Bay had a 1.5 game lead above the Vikings for the NFC North. And they walked into San Francisco and just frankly got walloped by San Francisco. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
I was able to watch most of that game, and Jimmy Garoppolo stunned it all over the Green Bay defense. George Kittle, he was fantastic. He had over 100 receiving yards. He had a touchdown catch, all while on having a broken bone in his ankle, which is just really impressive and just shows his toughness and shows how tough you got to be to play in the NFL.
So let's take a quick look. We're going to try to wrap things up pretty quickly here. Let's try to take a quick look at the NFC playoff picture right now. San Francisco's at 10-1. We do have an accompanying graphic for that. San Francisco's at 10-1. New Orleans is currently the second seed in the NFC at 9-2. Green Bay, with that loss, they're now 8-3 and tied for the Minnesota Vikings for the lead in the NFC North. There it is right there. The Packers and Vikings are at 8-3. The Cowboys, by virtue of just being slightly better than the 5-6 Philadelphia Eagles, they're in first. The Vikings are currently in the second wild card spot at 8-3. With Monday Night Football coming up, the Rams are currently at 6-4. They need to win that game to stay in the chase for the 6th seed. They're playing against the Baltimore Ravens.
That's going to be tough.
Very tough.
That's going to be tough.
Let's transition then real quick to the AFC playoff picture. The New England Patriots, by their win yesterday against the Cowboys, they're 10-1. The Baltimore Ravens, there they are. They're 8-2. They could be 9-2 potentially after tonight. The Texans and Chiefs both leading in their divisions at 7-4. The Buffalo Bills, by virtue of their schedule and the fact that they're behind the New England Patriots.
Yeah, and there's really good defense.
They are 8-3, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who would have thunk, they're in a playoff spot right now, 6-5.
That's crazy.
Three other AFC teams are 6-5. One's 5-6, and then 3 other teams are mathematically, I think, good to be at least in the race.
Battle for a playoff spot.
There are 3 teams that are 4-7. So I at least consider in the hunt at this point with 5 games left to be teams that could rationally or at least reasonably finish 9-7, or at least mathematically can finish 9-7. So that's at least where we stand. Where do you think this whole thing ends up in a couple of weeks?
I think it's really interesting because Minnesota, coming off the 2 weeks, the basically 15 days they've had off, and they get to prepare for the Monday night game against the Seattle Seahawks. Going up against Russell Wilson, that's going to be a really tough game, especially since it's in Seattle.
We'll get a chance to cover that in full next week.
We will, and it's really tough to play in Seattle. It's one of the loudest environments in the NFL, and last year they played them on Monday Night Football. It did not go very well, but I think the way that the Vikings have been playing this season, it should be a really, really competitive matchup. So we'll have to see what goes on that. I just think it's crazy that how in the NFC playoff picture, though by season's end, there is a chance that we could have a 6th seed at 13-3
or 12-4,
12-4, maybe even somehow like an 11-5 maybe, and have a 4th seed division winner at like 8-8 or 9-7.
Yeah, ridiculous.
It's crazy how that works, but honestly, it's just kind of how it goes.
Kind of see the same thing, the fact that the Vikings very well could not win the division but still be 12-4.
It's crazy.
Unbelievable. So we'll continue this talk next weekend into other shows as we go about this wild journey toward the NFL playoffs. That does it for episode 9. A little quicker than other episodes, but we will promise to cover more of the FCS playoffs and the NFL next week. We hope to see you then.